Did you know that the United States is the second largest consumer of energy in the world, and the vast majority of it comes from oil, coal, and natural gas? But what about green energy? That's the million-dollar question. And for the next few minutes, we'll define and explore the economic implications of a green energy economy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Comcast Newsmakers On the Vote. I'm Robert Trenum, and I'm joined by Phil Kerpen, Vice President for Policy at Americans for Prosperity. Phil, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you, Robert.
You know, we live in a culture, and I think George W. Bush said it best, that we are addicted to oil. Americans love to travel, the wide open spaces in their car. Americans are comfortable with oil. That's just something that we've grown up with. But when it comes to green technology, whether it's wind or solar or any of those other alternative sources of energy, it appears that this is a slow educational process that we're still kind of going through. Would you not agree with that?
Well, I mean, I think these wind and solar are actually much older technologies than oil and gas.
Well, that's true.
They've been around forever.
The
windmills. You had the little Dutch boy in front of the windmill in the Netherlands 800 years ago.
But you would acknowledge, though, with the advent of modern technology as it relates to the jet engine and also with the automobile, oil, for the most part, we have become addicted to.
Well, I think that's right, but I think that largely happened for pretty good economic reasons. You've got a huge amount of energy in a small volume. You've got a lot of BTUs, and so it's very efficient to use petroleum-based fuels, and that's kind of why the world economy has kind of organized itself around that. You try to shift to other technologies that are much less efficient, they're more expensive, you get less energy bang for your buck, and there are major negative economic consequences associated with that, and I think that's why our economy has stayed so oil intensive, oil dependent, because even with huge government subsidies, we're spending billions and billions on subsidies for wind, solar, ethanol, other so-called alternatives. They don't make sense economically, and I think we got to ask ourselves a question: can we really afford to keep putting a huge amount of subsidy dollars, of tax dollars, into technologies that don't seem to make economic sense? And I think you look at what's happened in Europe. In Germany, they've spent over 100 billion euros subsidizing wind generation for electricity and solar. And now they've got a very brutal winter. The sun's not shining, the solar's not producing, and so they're importing energy from nuclear power plants in Austria and France. They actually are importing energy from an oil-fired power plant in Austria that was taken out of mothballs just to meet that demand. And so I think you look at the experiences in other places. In Spain, they've put a huge amount of money into green energy subsidies. It's helped destroy their economy. I think if technologies don't work economically, you can lose an awful lot of money trying to make them work by pouring taxpayer dollars in, and I just don't think that's something we can afford to pursue.
Phil, for generations, decade after decade after decade, every single American president, probably from Dwight Eisenhower to the present, has said that we must transform our energy dependence, if you will, not only just on oil, but also on other natural energies out there. When do you think the light switch, literally and figuratively, will be flipped, where we could say, you know what, instead of buying that V8 automobile, we're going to buy the hybrid automobile? When do you think, from a cultural standpoint, that will happen? Do you think it'll happen in our generation? Do you think it's going to happen in a couple of more decades? Just if you had a crystal ball.
Well, I mean, it's tricky. Look, I mean, the driver of change in behavior is prices, for the most part, for most people. You have some people who are interested in ideological things. Maybe they're environmentalists. They get a certain car because of that, what have you. But for the vast majority of people, it's what makes the most sense for my family budget. Where they look at what the price of fuel is, what the price of the car is. They make decisions based on that. Most people don't really have the luxury of deciding based on anything else. And I think you look at the experience, even in countries with very high fuel taxes. In Europe, they're paying $8 or $9 a gallon. But, a lot of people still have to drive. It hasn't really cut down on driving, other than in cities where a lot of people can use bicycles. But a lot of people in America can't switch to a bicycle. And so, I think the only time we're really going to see large-scale fuel switching, especially in the automobile fleet, is if it actually makes economic sense. And we may see that with natural gas vehicles. GM and Chrysler have both said they're going to bring compressed natural gas pickup trucks to market soon, because gas prices are very cheap right now with all the shale production that's going on right now. But I don't think government can make it happen. I think it's going to happen when and if the economics dictate that it makes sense for most people, and it's hard to say when that'll happen, or even if it will.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned GM and some of and Chrysler when it comes to the alternative fuels vehicles, because when you take a look at public transportation out there in the country, whether it's in Washington, D.C. or in Philadelphia, New York, there's a lot of mass transit buses specifically that do not run on oil or gasoline. They run on clean powered gas. Last question, do you think that perhaps whether it's natural gas or perhaps it's clean coal? Do you think that's the wave of the future?
Well, we've got a huge amount of coal in this country, and unfortunately, there are a lot of very onerous regulations right now coming out of the EPA and restrictions on permitting from the Interior Department that make it pretty difficult to access a lot of that coal. And coal can be part of the solution for the transportation mix as well. I mean, there's some pretty basic chemistry to turn coal into liquid transportation fuel, methanol, and this has been done in South Africa for a long time. Actually, the Nazis did this. They powered their German tanks with liquid fuel that was made out of coal, and so that might be part of the answer also. But to me, from my perspective, this is something the market's going to have to sort out based on the economics. It's not a situation where politicians getting involved is likely to improve the results. I mean, you pointed out Carter tried to do this with the Synthetic Fuels Corporation. Of course, Obama's had all these subsidies for renewable fuels and what have you. We've had this whole ethanol boondoggle that's driven up the price of corn. We've got people starving all over the world because we're burning corn in the United States in the form of ethanol. So I just think it's very dangerous to try to put a thumb on the scale. And, a lot of very smart people are out there trying to solve this problem.
And they haven't figured it out yet.
And if someone does, people are going to flock to them because they'll build a better mousetrap. I think we're just going to have to wait until that happens.
Phil Kerpen, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And of course, thank you for joining us for this edition of Comcast Newsmakers on the Vote. I'm Robert Trainum. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you next time. Take care.